But today, and I have been talking to him for a while, I want to talk about a little bit about Jordan Salama. Jordan is a local boy. He grew up in Westchester and went to Pelham High School and then to Princeton University. And he is a writer, as you know, and he has published in many places. National Geographic, which is a pretty nice place to be, Scientific American, another fabulous magazine, and in the New York Times. And in 2021, the New York Times voted his book, which is Every Day the River Changes, one of the best travel books in 2021. That's a pretty good honor. And I thank you very much for showing the book. So I hope you will sit back and enjoy this new age travelogue by Jordan Salama. Please welcome Jordan. Oh, by the way, Jordan, I just want you to know I'm going to mute myself and get off screen, okay?
Okay, but if you have questions, Joan, you have
I will.
You gotta jump in. So please, I love questions. And that goes for everybody who's watching. If you would like to put questions in the chat at any time, please do. And I will probably wait till the end, but I want to get to your questions as soon as possible. So as I'm talking and giving a bit of an introduction about this project, if anybody has questions, please put them in the chat and I will gladly answer them. Also, I just want to say, Chappaqua Library, this is impressive. Can I go to some of these things? This is like amazing. The events sound great, and I'm really just honored and glad to be a part of it all. I'm from Pelham, but I'm not calling in from New York today. I am actually calling in from Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I'm here for the next month or so, doing some new projects that I'm happy to talk about further down the line. But today we are not talking about Argentina. We are talking about Colombia. And my new book, Every Day the River Changes, 4 weeks down the Magdelena, which tells the story of my journey down one of the greatest rivers in Latin America that maybe you've never heard of. Or if you have heard of it, perhaps you didn't know that it's one of the most storied rivers, not only in Colombia, but in all of the Americas. Think the Mississippi as a river that defines a country. The Magdalena defines Colombia. And Joan actually asked me a question before this that is a really nice way to start, I think, which is, how did I end up in Colombia traveling down the length of this very important river? Some people might think that it's a little bit random. And the answer is that it is pretty random. I come from, I was born and raised in New York, but my family kind of comes from all over the world, from Argentina, from Syria and Iraq. We're a Jewish family, an Arab Jewish family. And so my identity is kind of scattered and all over the place. So I am interested in telling stories for that reason and exploring the world through that kind of storytelling and writing. But I don't have any personal connection to Colombia, though I speak Spanish for my family. It's a totally different country. And I never would have thought that I would be writing my first book about Colombia had this coincidence not happened. So I went to Princeton. I was lucky to study there. And after my first year, I was given an opportunity to do an internship, like an informal internship for the Wildlife Conservation Society. That's the organization that runs all the zoos and aquariums in the New York area, like the Bronx Zoo and the Central Park Zoo. But they also have conservation offices all over the world where they work towards promoting the conservation of species and landscapes that are under threat. And they have a really, really wonderful presence in Latin America. So I knew that I wanted to do something with them. I'm interested in nature and in writing, storytelling in different ways. And one day they called me up and they said, we have a chance for you to spend a couple of weeks in Colombia. Now, when I got that phone call and I told people at school and some extended family members and friends that I had a chance to go to Colombia, everybody was terrified for me. Actually, more specifically, people thought that I was going to die. Because in the United States, I think that for a long time, Colombia has had this reputation, this stigma, perhaps because of what people watch on television or because of its long-running conflict, as a place of danger and violence and war. Now that's changing a little bit. As the title of my book suggests, it is a country in kind of constant flux. And I was going at a time, and I didn't realize this yet, where there was tremendous change happening. Now, there's one person who, when I told I was going to Colombia in New York, who wasn't terrified for me, and was actually very encouraging of this first trip. I'm going to read a short section from the beginning of the book to explain who that person was. And she's from White Plains. She's Colombian, and her name is Sandra. And she taught me how to play the piano when I was 5 years old. So I was 5 years old when I started taking piano lessons from a woman named Sandra Marlon Munoz. The year I was born, she'd moved to New York from the Colombian city of Cali to pursue a career in music. Sandra was in her 30s when I first became her student. She used to come to my house on Tuesdays after school. "Hi, Jordan, how are you?" she'd always say in her sing-song accented English. Everything about Sandra was musical. Her heels clacked against the wooden floor, her metal bracelets jangled as she walked. If my dad was home, they would speak Spanish, a language that I did not fully yet understand, but that sounded like music itself. Hers was a flying staccato, typical of Colombia. My dad's a slow, more exaggerated Argentine Spanish that sounds almost like Italian. During breaks, Sandra would play songs from her country. The small upright piano in the corner of our living room smiled as it came to life with pulsating, arpeggiated salsas and arabesques. A far cry from the slow drone of my attempts at Beethoven and Bach, her music was pure energy, and it was loud. "I want to learn those," I would say to Sandra as she and my mother drank tea after my younger brothers were finished with our lessons. "Please, Sandra, I want to play those." And I'll continue reading in a moment. But basically, when I called up Sandra to tell her that I was going to Colombia, she said, "Oh my God, this is amazing. You should stay with my grandmother. She'll take care of you." And I was imagining this grandmother who would take me out and show me around. Turns out that Sandra's grandmother was the kindest woman in the world, but she was 96 years old and couldn't get out of bed. And every night she would lock the door at 7 p.m. and wouldn't let me leave the house after the sun went down. And this was her way of keeping me safe. But I felt trapped and I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a phone with me. I didn't have internet. This was in 2016. And what I did was I started keeping a journal for the first time ever about the people who I met, the places I saw, the experiences I had. And for the first time, I was actually doing journalism without realizing it. And I was able to travel all around the country with the Wildlife Conservation Society and document stories of different communities in different natural settings and how people relate with their natural environment. A couple of years later, when I decided to write a college thesis, when I had to write a college thesis, I decided to write about the great Rio Magdalena of Colombia because I went back to those journals and I realized that everybody told me that I had to go there. Colombia is this vastly diverse country of people, landscapes, and species. And I saw this nation, this many nations within one nation, and I wanted to understand it more. So people were saying that this river cuts a kind of cross section through this tremendous diversity. And I thought this is a great way to use a single thread to connect disparate people, places, and cultures. My own family background also had something to do with this. This was also something that Joan and I had talked about briefly. So I'm going to read another small section now to give you a sense of where my family comes from and why I might be drawn to such a place as the Magdalena. It didn't hurt my imagination that I come from a family that has long traversed the different corners of this earth. Some of the most memorable moments of my childhood were spent sitting beside aunts and uncles and grandparents as they told me, in a spellbinding mix of English, Spanish, and Arabic, histories of a family that seemed forever destined to be on the move. As with most travelers of their time, they were driven by circumstances beyond their control: religious persecution, economic opportunity, political strife, and yet they hadn't failed to pass down tales of the new cultures and enlightening experiences that they'd encountered on the road. I'd long been living vicariously through the stories of my grandfather, my father's father, himself a classmate of Che Guevara's in medical school, who grew up in Buenos Aires and spent many years as a young doctor backpacking and training in the Argentine countryside before eventually moving to New York. Abuelo told me of his father, my great-grandfather, a Syrian Jewish immigrant to Argentina at the turn of the 20th century, who worked as an itinerant salesman on horseback in the Andes Mountains. There, as the story goes, the Arab Jew from Damascus became Argentine, learning Spanish from folk songs and card games, sitting around bonfires with gauchos, and sleeping in ranch houses along his trade route. Many of his relatives and compatriots, also fleeing religious persecution in the old Ottoman Empire, found their way to other nations of Latin America, among them Mexico, Venezuela, and Colombia, where they built new lives and families and identities. On my mother's side, there was the great-great-great-grandfather who led a caravan of 1,000 camels along the famed Silk Road, trading carpets and textiles and spices in cities like Baghdad, Aleppo, Isfahan, and beyond. Other Baghdadi Jewish ancestors made it as far as Shanghai and Mumbai. In the stories, it sounded easy. Their everyday bumps in the road smoothed over in favor of historical drama and tall tales. There seemed to be no port where their wanderings hadn't reached, and no place where there wasn't an adventure to be found. So here I was, a college student who now suddenly, after coming from a family of immigration and migration and movement, really forced movement more than anything else, I had a chance to travel by my own accord, to travel voluntarily. And that's a huge privilege. And I wanted to do something with that. And I think that wanting to tell the stories of my own family was how I got into writing, but wanting to tell the stories of other people was how I became a professional writer or a journalist. So kind of influenced by all of these things, by my first trip to Colombia, staying with Sandra's 96-year-old grandmother, to my own family's mixed identity from many different places all over the world, I decided that I was going to take a 4-week journey through the heart of a very misunderstood country, but a country of great beauty and diversity, and to write what we're calling a travelogue for a new generation. And before I go on to talk about the book itself, what does that mean, a travelogue for a new generation? It doesn't mean that just one generation or one age group can read it. This is a book that can be enjoyed by all ages. But what it does mean is that it tries to push back against some of the things that I think travelogues have done in the past that are a little bit problematic. I think that if people have read some of these kinds of travel writing stories from a long time ago, you may notice that there's a lot of exoticizing that goes on. There's sometimes even bullying. People make fun of the people that they're writing about. That's not the case with this book. In this book, I try to take a step back and allow the people who I meet along the Magdalena to take center stage so that their voices can be amplified and center stage of this story, because really it is the story of a place that is not mine. And so the best way to tell that story is to allow the people who live there to tell it for themselves. I take this 4-week journey down the Magdalena, trying to understand a country recovering from more than half a century of conflict through the lens of some really extraordinary, ordinary people who I meet along the way. I meet an old man who builds really colorful wooden canoes, a group of biologists who are studying the only invasive population of hippopotamuses that live in the wild outside of Africa. They live in the Magdalena, and it's a crazy problem that they have going on there. A school teacher who brings books to children who don't have access to libraries.
Wait a minute. You just said that was what animal was living in the Magdalena?
Hippopotamuses.
Hippopotamus is one of the most dangerous animals in the world. Certainly the African hippopotamus, and I'm sure. Weren't you nervous when you were going down the Magdalena?
Yes, and
you see any?
Well, this is part of the problem. So there, I met fishermen and farmers, fishermen whose boats have been like bumped by hippopotamuses coming up from the shallows.
Oh
farmers
my God!
Chased off their land by hippopotamuses like running around like cows. It's a real big problem there, and
I would imagine.
Yeah, it's an ecological disaster because these 4 pet hippopotamuses in an exotic zoo escaped into the river and have now proliferated. There's like 100 of them.
They escaped. That was how the population started?
Yeah.
Okay. Just in case you know, I was a volunteer at the World Wildlife Zoo, the Bronx Zoo. So so interesting to hear about it, but to hear about, and I know about a lot of the animals, especially hippopotamuses, and to think that you were on a river with them, I could understand why your family would say to you, you'll be killed.
but they're two different things, right? Like I think the people who I met or who I knew in the US were mainly worried about my safety because of the conflict in Colombia.
I see.
More than half a century of civil war that's been going on between guerrillas and paramilitaries and drug traffickers has resulted in this big stigma of Colombia as a dangerous place, a place where foreigners should not go. But the truth is that was changing a lot when I traveled down the Magdalena. In 2016, a peace deal was signed to kind of officially put an end to the conflict, though it hasn't really done that. I went during a moment of relative calm where there was a lot of hope for a transition to peace. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to travel this river, was to understand how ordinary people in their everyday lives are dealing with such an important transition at a key moment for the country and for the continent. But yes, it turned out that, I was totally received by the kindest people, having the most hospitality everywhere that I went. And probably the most dangerous thing that happened to me was that I was in a canoe where the motor, like on the back of the boat, died right as we were getting really close to 2 hippopotamuses. And they turned their heads just like this, slowly. There were two of them. They opened their teeth, their mouths really wide, their teeth were there, like dripping. And it was like we were maybe like less than 100 yards away. And it was really scary. But then the motor came back to life and we sped away. So it turned out that it's like people, again, it's all about pushing back against misconceptions. And in the same way that the hippopotamuses have their own misconceptions, treated as a kind of cartoonish problem, when it's actually a real biological and ecological kind of catastrophe that's happening there. Yeah, there's a lot going on. To continue though on this list of kind of, to give you an overview of the kinds of people who I met, a school teacher who created something called the Biblioburro, a traveling donkey library to bring, a traveling library on a donkey to bring books to children who don't have access to libraries. An amazing, amazing person. An elderly man, 89 years old, who spent 77 of his 89 years crafting these beautiful filigree jewelry pendants. So like little necklace flowers or sombreros or little fishes of silver and gold, maintaining a tradition that's been going on for thousands of years and comes from kind of all over the world. This is a really storied river. If anybody knows the writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the kind of probably the most famous Colombian to have ever existed, who wrote 100 Years of Solitude and Love in the Time of Cholera, the Magdalena River features heavily in his stories. It was the river of his life and his childhood. At the same time, the Magdalena is the birthplace of some of the musical rhythms that are most prominent in popular music today, especially in Latin America. Shakira was born along the banks of the Magdalena. So even though it's a river that maybe you might not have heard of, it actually has real strong connections to life all around the world, and is a really historically and present day rich place in terms of stories. And it's also a very complex place, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to write this book. So this book tells the story of one young person's journey down the river. I'm 25, and I was 21 when I did this trip as part of my college thesis, which then unexpectedly turned into a book. And it doesn't try to be more than that. I think that there's a universal aspect of me, this person from this wide range of backgrounds, but also from a place like New York, the New York area, going down the Magdalena. And it's very clear to the reader that this story is being told through my eyes, and that through my eyes, you're meeting all of these people. Though again, I try to kind of step back as much as possible. But yeah, I think that it is a very special project to me, because it also marks a kind of formative time in my own life. And because it was the project that made me become a writer for the first time ever. And so it's also changed me in many ways, as this book title, Every Day the River Changes, suggests. It's just filled with changes on the level of the place and the level of the writer and the level of the people. I'm glad to see that there's a question in the chat. Is the whole river?
Right, I just wanted to, right.
Yes, which is something that I want to talk about, because no, and that's a very important story about the story that has to do with this river, is that it used to be navigable, in large part from the Caribbean to near the capital in the mountains, Bogota. But basically people would take steamboats from the river to a point near the capital and then take other forms of transportation inland to get to the capital. And it was the artery of a nation. It was the artery in the heart, through the heart of a nation. And there were these glory days that people talked about all the time about when the river was navigable. But because of environmental destruction, sedimentation, and deforestation along the river's banks, it has become really shallow. And so big passenger boats cannot pass anymore. And that's had a real difficult impact on the people who live along the river all along the way. Like this man who makes silver filigree jewelry, for example. This is a very small example, but he had no customers for a really long time, and his jewels would pile up in a glass cabinet beside him. And that was just because he loved so much what he was doing that he couldn't stop, but he had nobody to sell them to. This idea of, is the river navigable, then brings up the question of, how did I travel the river if not by boat? Again, a river journey might be suggested that I did it by boat, but I didn't. I took pretty much every form of transportation besides an airplane possible to do this trip. I traveled by bus, I traveled by pickup truck, literally hanging onto the roof rack of a pickup truck while careening down winding back roads of the Andes. I traveled by mule, I traveled on foot, I traveled by canoe, and I traveled on this very, very unique form of transportation, the craziest form of transportation that I've ever taken in my life. And I'm a transportation nerd, so that's saying a lot, called the moto balinera. The moto balinera is a wooden platform, like you can imagine, it's flat, and on the bottom there are railroad wheels, and it's powered by a motorcycle along an abandoned stitch of railroad track. Now, the people said it was abandoned, but then when I got on, somebody whispered to me that if the freight train came unexpectedly, I'd have to be prepared to jump off. But literally, it was plastic chairs on a wooden rail cart powered by a motorcycle along an abandoned stretch of railroad track in the middle of the night, in the dark, in a very, very remote area along this river. And it was a real adventure. You feel like you're flying, even though the thing is going maybe 10, 12 miles an hour maximum. You feel like, like you're on the most thrilling roller coaster in the world, because it's just so new. And that was probably the most fun part about this trip, was the many different kinds of transportation that I was able to take. Joan, were you going to say something?
I'm just trying to get a handle on you in the middle of the night on this flat railroad, traveling along, and no lights. I'm assuming there were no spotlights around, so you know where you're going. You just hope to God that you're staying on this railroad track, and you'll be okay. No fast turns.
Yeah, it was actually one of the most beautiful things ever, because the moon was so bright.
Oh, the moon was bright, right.
The moon was so bright you could see everything. And the whole landscape was like illuminated in this absolutely gorgeous, you know what, I'm going to actually just read a very quick couple sentences here that can describe it.
While you're looking for those pages,
yeah.
I just want to say somebody is interested in getting books, to send books to the teacher. So we'll certainly arrange it if you email me, and I could email just Jordan, and we could arrange for that. Okay.
That would be great. Yeah, I can definitely help with that. Part of the reason why he's had such success is because his story has been spread far and wide all across the world. I did an event with the Mamaroneck Public Library a couple of days ago, and they had a picture book that was written about him called Waiting for the Biblioburro. And he's just a wonderful person. And so donations have poured in, and he's really always grateful for that. Let's see here, where I was going to read about the about the moto balinera. Here we go. The moto balinera must not have been moving faster than 15 miles an hour, but the wind in our faces and the buzz of the metal wheels on rails beneath our feet was nothing short of exhilarating. We raced, or so it felt, north through the pitch black countryside, and only by the light of the moon were we able to make out the silhouettes of the long verdant plains strewn with small grassy mounds and slumbering cows on either side of our route. We crossed a bridge over a small creek, and the familiar railroad smell of creosote was fresh in the air. For a second, I felt as if I were back home, commuting on some 8-car behemoth into New York's Grand Central Terminal. But then an eagle jetted off from a bush, a lazy dog scampered at the very last second from his trackside nap, scared even by us, for the moto balinera was the behemoth here. Several miles to our right, not visible even during daytime from this inland stretch of tracks, the Magdelena flowed parallel to our route. The darkness was occasionally pierced by bursts of light. Fireflies blinked in the grass beside the tracks, emitting unexpected white flashes instead of yellow ones. To the west, the faraway mountains of the Central Cordillera were now and again lit up by flares of lightning, the thunder too distant to be heard. We passed one-room farmhouses of wooden planks and black tarps, the faces of the people who lived there illuminated only by candlelight. In Estación Pita, the only sizable settlement of around a dozen visible homes between Santiago del Rio and Estación Cocorná, a well-lit soccer field sent a wide beam into the starry sky. The other thing that's interesting about this moto balinera is that it's only a one railroad track, so there's not two. So if somebody's coming in the opposite direction, there's like this polite game of chicken of whoever is more difficult to take off the tracks gets to stay, and the other group, even if it means like unloading 6 people from their plastic chairs and lifting the entire thing off to the side, that those people have to then take the entire apparatus off the tracks. And we had a couple of those instances where there was this cart coming by with huge bags of gravel and cement. And so we lost. So we had to unload ourselves, pick up the whole thing.
Understandable.
Yeah. But there's a lot interesting to be said about the motobalinera. I can keep talking for forever, but I want to answer questions, whether it's from Joan or from people.
I just want to know, you talked about the hippopotamus. Were there any other wildlife that you saw during your trip?
Important question. Great question. Yes, Colombia is the second most biodiverse country in the whole world, second only to Brazil, which a lot of people don't realize. I saw howler monkeys stirring in guadua trees. I saw river turtles. I knew that there were jaguars in the midst in some places, but I never saw them with my own eyes. Saw lots of different kinds of frogs and snakes, different kinds of deer. Yeah, lots and lots of wildlife. Oh, and so many birds. You mentioned that you had a bird watching event recently with the Chappaqua Library.
Right.
Yeah, no, so many different kinds of birds. It's really interesting because so much of the land along the Magdalena has been cleared for agricultural purposes, which is very sad. And there's also a lot of land that is still pretty untouched. And so it basically results that there is a lot of wildlife and people living side by side, which I go into in depth in the book, makes for some very interesting situations. One of the most inspiring people who I met along the Magdalena was a woman who is arranging for her community to hatch and release baby sea turtles that are, baby river turtles that are endangered and endemic only to the Magdalena River, but are under threat because people like to eat them and their eggs. So also very interesting to talk with environmentalists along the route of the Magdalena. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Joan. I mean, that's definitely
right. You know, we did talk about many things before, and I forgot which questions I had, which you were going to save for.
Oh yeah, what else did you ask me? Oh, you asked me about the weather. What was the weather like?
For the weather, right?
Yes, along the Magdalena were some of the hottest places I've ever been in my life, and I don't say that lightly. These were towns where it felt like it was far more than 100 degrees, the kind of hot weather that saps every ounce of energy out of you when you wake up in the morning until as night falls and you're trying to fall asleep, and your only hope is that it will rain at night. And it's kind of like hot pans under a cold tap, like when you take a frying pan and you put it under the sink and it steams with smoke when you pour the cold water over it. When it rains at night, that's almost what it feels like. It's so refreshing and so relieving because the heat is just so oppressive and difficult. And so this gets to a point of, you know, how I try to really temper my descriptions and explanations of this place, because there really is a dichotomy between beauty and struggle. There's many beautiful things along the Magdalena that I try to emphasize because, again, Colombia has a reputation as being a country of war and of violence. And to push back against that, to show all is beautiful in this world, I think is important. But also it's important not to romanticize and not to ignore the very real struggles that people face in a country that has huge legacies of violence and also very much present day challenges with climate change. It's only going to get hotter along the Magdalena. The fish are only going to get smaller as the populations are depleted and as there are more droughts. And so there's lots of issues with climate change. And along the environmental question, we have a question in the chat of, is the water in the river drinkable? Definitely not directly, because it's extremely contaminated by all sorts of contaminants, whether they're chemical contaminants or runoff from agriculture or from waste of cows. But then again, the basin of the Magdalena provides drinking water for something like 2/3 of the Colombian population. So treated, I guess it is drinkable, but not definitely not in any way that's not very treated. That's an important question. And all along the river, I collected stories of climate change and land and water conservation, which was very important. I think
was there any, oh, sorry.
No,
Was there anything that happened that you were anticipating and didn't happen, or something that happened and you were shocked? Or,
Oh,
something so surprising that you said, oh, I never expected this to happen.
sure. Well, I think that a lot of people ask me how I met all of the people that I did along the river.
Oh,
And, not going in with any kind of connection to the country besides that first previous trip, and creating kind of a line of trust where basically I would meet somebody and then I would meet somebody who they knew further down the line, or explore a story that somebody suggested to me, things like that. And I was surprised by how easy it was for people to open up about their stories. That's always a challenge as a journalist. But I think that there were a few things that I had going for me that allowed that to be possible. One was that I was young, that people saw me as somebody who I think that they could trust and open up to, which was really special. I always told them exactly what I was doing, that I was writing about them and their stories. But I think that through things like just by immersing myself in people's lives, like I didn't show up with a questionnaire or anything like that. I really tried to live with people for a few days at a time, playing soccer, listening to music, flying kites, doing things that made me a part of their everyday lives, made it easier to ask the more difficult or sensitive questions. But I was overall extremely, extremely surprised by how kind of willing people were to tell their stories. And now that I think about it, maybe it was also because it had been such a long time since any foreign journalist had gone in and tried to ask these kinds of questions, not from a lens purely of, again, conflict, violence, and war, but really wanting to learn about what everyday life is like
right.
in these places. That was definitely surprising. And like, so what would happen is it would be that I would like one day I would be very stressed, thinking, I don't know what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. I have no idea who I'm going to meet or what. And somehow it would fall into a place. A friend of a friend of a friend would end up joining me and being one of the most inspirational people I met all along the entire way. So life has a way of working itself out, which was really great. And along the line of meeting people, what was your sense of crime in the chat? Did you at any time feel that your safety was compromised? I was very careful about this also because I was traveling under the grant of a university. I had to adhere to certain safety protocols to make sure that nothing would happen to me. So I had my kind of senses about me. I didn't travel on buses or anything like that at night, with the exception of the Magdelena, which was actually an accident. I got there late. And in terms of crime in general, I was very aware nothing ever happened to me. I never felt in danger. I never felt like anything would happen. The hippopotamuses were the only time I was actually scared for myself. But then again, there is this kind of understanding that things do happen, and that is never lost on me. I traveled for one portion of this trip into the Andes with a renowned Colombian anthropologist whose work at an archaeological UNESCO World Heritage Site of megalithic statues, pre-Hispanic relics in the Andes is one of the most stunning World Heritage Sites in the Americas. And he was a key player in having that happen, and also an ardent land and water conservationist, was murdered a year after I met him, which was really tragic. I mean, I spent so much time with him, and we went into the Andes together. He became a friend, and he was murdered a year after I met him. And this is part of a kind of larger trend spate of killings of environmentalists and land and culture preservationists in Colombia. As the country started to open up a little bit more and the guerrilla groups were demobilizing with the peace in rural areas where the state didn't have social and economic investments, local people who were defending the land, defending species, defending culture and historical sites would get in the way of new armed groups who wanted access to natural resources like gold mines or oil or logging. And so now there's this new kind of proxy war being fought in the Colombian countryside. It's the most dangerous country in the world for environmentalists. And because Luis Manuel Salamanca, the anthropologist who I met, was murdered after I interviewed him and spent time with him, it kind of changed the whole scope of the book. Because it so happened, and I didn't realize it at the time, but only after what happened to Luis happened, I realized that almost everybody that I interviewed along the stretch of this river was what they call a social leader or community leader in some way. And in some way, lots of them were at risk in ways that I didn't necessarily fully understand while I was there. And so to answer this question, no, again, I myself, thank goodness, was safe the whole time, but it wasn't lost on me that something could have happened at any moment. And I still, this book tries to honor the memory of people like Luis, the more than 1,200 environmentalists and other kinds of activists and local leaders killed in Colombia since 2016.
Oh my.
Yeah, it's a really terrible, terrible problem.
It is a horrible. Did you take any pictures, photographs while you were there?
I did. Sorry?
Are any included in the book?
They are not included in the book because unfortunately it is too expensive to print pictures. The publisher didn't let me. I wanted to, but if anybody here is on social media, I will put my Instagram handle, Jordan Salama 19, in the chat right there. And on my Instagram page, you can find lots of different pictures from my trip and stories from and about the people who I met along the way. So social media has been a place where I'm able to put pictures and videos. Now, what I was saying about the social leaders and the different kinds of people who I met and what I realized about their situations also gets me to another point about getting back to how this is a travel writing for kind of new generation or new age, is that with technology, I've been able to keep in touch with almost everybody who's featured in this book. Even though I traveled down the Magdalena in 2018, I have been in almost constant contact with all of the people I spent time with, which is a really beautiful thing. Because though I spent only 4 weeks along the Magdalena, maybe a little bit more time than that, given some follow-up trips, but because I spent a limited amount of time on the ground in these brief encounters with people, as travel writing tends to be, they aren't brief encounters because they are informed by the changes in my life and in these people's lives through Facebook and WhatsApp that we're able to keep in touch and build these really strong relationships, which makes it, I think, a pretty unique project in that sense. Like, in a way, it's 4 years of encounters instead of 4 weeks. So that was a special thing.
Do you have any desire to go back to
very much so
relationships? Mm-hmm.
Yes. I mentioned that I'm in Argentina right now for a little while working on a new project. And on my way back to New York, I hope to stop in Colombia for a couple of weeks and spend time with some of the people who I was with, and to share with them some rough translations of the book and just kind of catch up with old friends.
Right. When we spoke, you said you were working on something else.
I am. And so, first of all, you can find lots more than just the Magdelena book online on the New York Times and National Geographic. Mainly, if you look up my name, you can find lots of different essays and articles that I've written about a variety of topics. But right now I am working on a new book project, which is exciting and is also a kind of adventure story, but more towards the lens of my own family's background. As I mentioned and read from part of this book, was that my great-grandfather was a traveling salesman in the Andes. And in fact, a lot of my ancestors were these traveling salesmen all over the world. And my great-grandfather, the Syrian Jewish immigrant to Argentina, who was a traveling salesman on a horse in the Andes, had this kind of incredible story where he traveled 1,000 miles between Argentina and Bolivia, selling clothes and textiles in remote villages in the mountains. And supposedly, according to family legend, had a few children out of wedlock that he left along the way. And I went looking for them. I went looking to find the long lost Salamas of the Andes. And I'm not going to reveal what exactly happened, but what I also found was these traces of a family kind of forever on the move, these Arab Jewish identities that have been lost to history and persecution, but that are very much still alive in certain pockets of the world, including in my own family. So exploring that story through an adventure in the mountains in Argentina is my next project, which I'm currently writing now. And hopefully when the book comes out a long time from now, we can talk about it again with Chappaqua Library.
Well, you have such an interesting life. So many cultures all blended into you.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's definitely, I feel very lucky to be able to trade in stories as a career, as my full-time job, to be able to meet interesting people. I feel like a student all the time. And
Mhm.
that's not something that a lot of people can say for their lives and their jobs. And I just feel really lucky to be able to do this. I mean, everything from like recently in October, I took a train from New York to San Francisco for a
Mhm.
story. And that's the kind of adventure that people dream about. And I've dreamed about for a long time. And to be able to say that I did that for work was, I mean, it's just, it's something that I just feel very, very grateful for. And
You've had such an amazing life, and you're 25 now?
I'm 25.
Yeah. So not many people have had such experiences as you had. And you're the perfect American, the blend of all these different cultures. That's what America is now, isn't it? So
Yeah,
it's really
I appreciate you saying that, because I think that that's a lot of what I try to do with my writing, is to inspire this kind of greater sense of cross-cultural understanding, and also a greater respect for nature and for people in different parts of America and also the world.
great. It sounds wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
is there anybody have any other questions that you'd like to ask Jordan? Put them in the chat now. I see you have to get the book. Of course you have to get the book.
Yes, there's
It's
lots
going
of
to be an
copies.
amazing thing. I'll have to, you think you've lived an exciting life, and here you are at 25, and you've been all over and done such amazing things. And I'm so glad that the university backed you, and the World Wildlife Association Society backed you. It's really good to know that there's money well spent there.
Thank
So
you. And
anybody else have any other questions? No? Give it a minute.
no, so I mean, if nobody has any other questions, I would like to add this last thing, which is that this book came out in November, and the biggest challenge with it has been to get it into the hands of people who may not realize that they're interested in a book about Colombia and a river that they, again, may not have heard of. It's a pretty specific place. But the truth is that the stories along this river are very universal. And it so happened that I did this trip and wrote this book before the pandemic. But so many of the themes in the book are so much more relevant now than have ever been before. Now, we're very lucky to live in a place that's not in conflict, like Colombia is, and like many other countries in the world are. The circumstances couldn't be more different. And I'm not trying to equate the two things. But what I will say is that this book is filled with the stories of people who are working tirelessly to pull their communities out of very difficult situations, creating beauty in worlds of struggle. That's what people have said to me, and it's the common theme throughout all of these interactions. And I think that what a lot of readers, now being we're 3, almost 4 months out from the book's publication, what a lot of readers have latched onto and have taken away from this book is this idea that we're all kind of reconsidering our passions at this moment. What are we passionate about? What are we spending our days, our time doing? And is it meaningful for us? Is it meaningful for the people around us? And the people in my book, the people who inspired me along the Magdelena, are the same people who I hope will inspire all of you in a similar way that they taught me the value of living a life of purpose and meaning, kind of no matter the circumstances. And as a result, it's just a lot of examples of beauty in difficult situations. And so I hope that people will look past the perhaps maybe different subject matter and pick up this book, because I promise you, you'll want to keep reading, keep meeting one person after the next. It's the kind of book that you'll pick up a chapter, read it, and then you can put it down for 2 weeks and then pick it up and pick right back where you left off. So
that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on writing the book. I hope you have a good run. Just so everybody knows, I had seen the book and all the reviews. I mean, you got sterling reviews from so many sources that I was really happy to do it. So, and I want to thank Amy Berger, who is the person who put me in touch with Jordan. She's also a reference librarian at the Chappaqua Library and a wonderful person. And somebody just, what is your latest project? Do you
It's
have
the
any?
project that I just mentioned briefly about my family's background in the Andes and the adventures, the Arab Jews of the world, which is really interesting, because I think that in the US, Arab and Jew are taught to be two identities that exist in conflict. But in reality, there are a lot of people like me who feel like we're both. And I think that proves to be a very complex existence sometimes. And so this is a story that tries to address that.
Because this is a difficult situation. So good for you. Good for you. Any other questions? That seemed to have been the last. Well, Jordan, thank you. Good luck on your project. Good luck on your next book. Good luck on and your life debate. So thank you all for coming. And if you have any questions, you could email me at jkuhn@wlsmail.org. And I hope you will please come to some of the programs that I talked about before, certainly, and visit our website, chappaqua.library.org. And thank you again, Jordan, and thank you all for coming. Bye.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Lots of yays. Okay.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming, really, and to Amy and Shari, who I also see in here. It's just wonderful that people have come together to make this possible. So I really, really do appreciate it.
Yeah, it's more people like you in this world, we might have a better world.
I don't know that. But I try to do what I can with these stories, and I will keep writing for as long as people will read and listen.
Appreciation of what you've done and the animals, and that's where I come from a lot.
It's great to hear you work with the Wildlife Conservation Society. That's amazing.
Yeah.
You must know John Calvelli from Pelham.
No, I worked in 1987 to 1985, plus 7 years to 92.
Gotcha.
So it was a long time ago, but I did know a lot of the caretakers and a lot of the heads of the departments, and it was an amazing place to work. I was a volunteer, but I worked a huge number of hours there because I loved it. And because I was there so much, I was able to get a little extra duties that were denied to other people. And I did have a strong biology background. So I really had a wonderful time, which is something I will always treasure. So
that is great. Yeah, I'm happy to stick around. We can talk. I mean, if people have questions, I don't know if questions occur to people and they want to ask. I know there's still a lot of people in the meeting.
I haven't gotten over the fact that you were in a boat with hippopotamuses right next to you.
Yeah.
Because I went on a safari and it was the hippos, and they told us to stay away. They are the most dangerous animal. They could run faster than you could possibly imagine, and just stay away. And ever since then, I've really been frightened of them, though I've never seen one again, even in a zoo. And to think that you were in a boat in the river with them, I can
in Latin America. That's the shocking part of all this.
Latin America, right?
Latin America,
from these 4 hippopotamuses that that escaped. I just read the book. I guess that's the way to know.
For those who are here in the meeting still, I mean, I guess I could show some pictures if people are interested, just from my phone, to show people kind of.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it'd be wonderful. So, okay, this is all from my Instagram. So as I mentioned, Jordan Salama 19, if you want to see more like this. But this is Luis Soriano, the biblioburro.
Wait, let me switch the screen to speaker view so we can see it clearly. Okay.
Luis Soriano, the biblioburro. There's his donkey. His donkeys are called Alfa and Beto, Alfabeto for alphabet. It's very wonderful. This story is extremely inspiring. This is Simon Villanueva, the master filigree jeweler of Mompos, a river town near the mouth of the Magdelena, and he makes these beautiful creations. When I met him, was 89, as I mentioned, and his vision was failing, and he worked only with his hands by that point. And he made things. This is a silver pendant hat. It's absolutely gorgeous.
That is beautiful.
If you can see the intricacies of just how intricate and just fantastic that work is. And let's see what else here can I show. This is a Magdelena river turtle, endangered and endemic only to the river basin of the Magdelena.
And these are the river turtles that this woman was releasing, curing and releasing into the wild.
Yeah, and it really is it is both a biological endeavor, but it is also a communal endeavor, because you have to change the perceptions of the community that has long considered this turtle to be a delicacy, leading to its demise in the wild. And that's it. One of the most beautiful things that I experienced along the Magdelena was kite flying. Kite flying is, in the month that I went in August, just the skies are filled with kites made from everything from tissue paper to plastic bags and reeds from the banks of the river. And so here are two people from the town of Estación Cocorná, a child and an older adult. Oh, sorry, my phone went blank. Building kites along the river. It's really special. And it's like an explosion of color in the skies. It's really, really wonderful. This man's name is Rafael Semanate. I met him near the river's source in the Andes in a town called Quinchana. A lot of my time along the Magdalena was spent. Also, people can feel free to leave, duck out of this. This is bonus time now, but I maybe people are interested in seeing this. I don't mean to keep people. So if we need to end.
Don't worry. Somebody just gave me an email, which I will give to you.
Okay.
I'll email it to you.
All along the way, I tried to document folk tales and oral histories and legends on the river, speaking with from everyone from the oldest people in town to the very youngest. Here's me interviewing some children in the green mountains of the early reaches of the Magdalena.
Did you bring presents with you at all to give to anybody that you met along the way?
I did, and that was it's tricky because you have to try to find line of giving gifts and it not appearing as like a conflict of interest for when you're doing journalistic reporting. So mostly it was not for the people who I interviewed, but sometimes for like to I don't know how to explain this, but like to incorporate myself into communities, I would sometimes have like chocolates with me, like that just I brought along with me, or snacks, and we would eat together, things like that. Because to give an actual gift to somebody would be more of a conflict of interest. And let's see here. This is me along the Magdalena, where it's very narrow. It's much, much, much wider than this in lots of places, but this is near where it starts.
Yes, I see. You couldn't have had a boat there at all.
No boats there. This is where it's much wider, and men work to extract the sediment from the banks of the river to sell to cement factories, which is very, very environmentally destructive, but still very difficult work.
Was that a flood? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, this is the river. They work in the river. Let's see here. And to finish, this is me with the book.
There you are.
In a Barnes and Noble. So a little different. But yeah, so that is what I have from pictures for now to show you.
And it was very interesting because we've had quite a number of people stay. I
Yeah,
mean, we had a lot of people come to this program. A lot came to the program, and a good percentage stayed to hear this little chit chat. So thank you. You're an interesting person.
I hope that it was enjoyable for people, and we will make sure that we can try to get books to the teacher and all that.
Right. Stuff. I will send you the email right now as soon as I get off the Zoom. Okay. All right. Thank you again for coming. Great talk and fantastic pictures. Amy Scottberger. There were more people watching. And it was Amy who, as I said before, pulled this all together.
I really, really appreciate
fabulous reference librarian too. All right. Good night, everybody, and have a good evening. Goodbye, Jordan. You'll hear from me in a minute. Okay, bye-bye.